Hi, this is Khalil Golivala. Welcome to another episode of the BIPOC Manager Podcast. In today's episode, I'm really excited to have Sema Burney with us. Sema is a bilingual consultant specializing in the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership development. Born and raised in Quebec with parents from Southeast Asia, Sema has always had a passion for diversity. In 2010, she founded Burney Consulting, a boutique-style firm offering services to organizations seeking to build a more inclusive workplace where everyone can belong. With an accounting designation and a master's in business administration, Seema has over 20 years of experience helping develop a high-level expertise as a strategist, trainer, and facilitator, which is why I'm so excited to have here as a guest today. Seema, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Khalil. It's really an honor to be with you and have this great conversation.
Thanks, Seema. One of the topics I would love to is people talk about microaggressions. Can you talk a bit more about microaggressions are like what they are and how minorities can best respond to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So microaggressions is something that comes up a lot. You might hear the term microaggression, microassault, micro inequities. What it's really speaking about is sort of these subtle, sometimes seemingly innocent actions, behaviors, comments, questions that seem harmless, but that can really be off-putting to somebody, can make them feel excluded, and can be hurtful, really. And when these actions are sort of accumulated over time, it's not really the one-time incident. It's like the accumulation of these actions or behaviors or comments over and over and over throughout an entire career. That's when it becomes really heavy. That's when it can even become discriminatory.
Yeah.
And so, because they're so subtle, so we sometimes don't notice them. But really, the accumulation of them is what can be hurtful and impactful. And sort of one of the things that we're always trying to address is this idea of microaggressions. So I can give you some examples, and you might also have some examples. I know we were talking about names and, like mispronouncing names
Mm.
all the time. Most people don't mind if you mispronounce their name like once or twice, but then it's like, oh, that's complicated. Can I call you this? Being constantly ignored. That famous question of, well, where are you from? Where are you really from? Wow, you have no accent. Like all those little comments that seem harmless
Yeah.
in the lifetime of an employee, and especially when you're on the receiving end of those comments,
Yeah.
it could just really make you feel like you're othered, like you don't really belong, especially in that workspace.
Yeah, I saw the comments like stuff like, "Oh, you're so well spoken."
Yes,
Oh,
exactly.
it's
I
such a
have a good friend that's she's black, and people will say that, wow, you're so articulate, or like, oh, you don't speak black, and it's like, a lot of times people think they're being complimentary, but yet what they're doing is they're really singling out a certain trait that you might have, whether it's a racial trait or any other type of trait, and putting the emphasis on that. And again, it's the accumulation of that over and over again that can really be hurtful.
yeah, of that weight. And I think you mentioned before, Seema, it's like it's death by a thousand cuts.
Yeah, exactly.
Humans over time. And
Yeah.
so in terms of the situation where it sounds as if people think on one hand, like I guess like the cases of clear sort of like let's call it, prejudice. This is more about someone who may have a well intention,
Mhm.
just the whole delivery kind of goes off. Is there anything that on the other a minority can do to maybe address the microaggression or just help the other person kind of like navigate that space?
Yeah. So it's interesting because you said it right. There's a difference between the intention and the impact. And when I'm doing sort of training on the corporate side, often I'm speaking to people who are not in the marginalized groups, and we talk a lot about, you're probably very well intentioned. I'm sure you didn't mean it that way, but what you've said can be really hurtful, and the impact. And so there's a difference between intent versus impact. And the reality is, it doesn't really matter what the intent was. I like to assume most people have good intent. I think it would be hard to work in this space if I didn't assume that. But regardless of our intent, the impact can be very hurtful. And so when you're on the receiving end of these comments, it really kind of depends on a few different factors of how you might respond. So, sometimes you have to ask yourself the question, first of all, how important is this relationship with this person? Is it a person I value? Is it a relationship I value? Is this issue important? Because it can be really draining, let's face it, to respond to micro inequities or microaggressions, because it takes courage, it takes energy. And again, if you're addressing these things all the time, it can really be difficult to do so all the time. And I'm sure, you probably had those days where someone says something and you're just like, "Oh, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go because I don't have the energy to respond." And so letting it go is a valid response in some cases. Sometimes we're just going to let things go because we don't have the energy to deal with it that day. Or maybe this person in a relationship is not important to us and it's not worth our time and energy necessary to invest in that. And other times we might let something go temporarily because maybe it really upset us and it really triggered us and really angered us. And we know that if we say something right away, it won't come out the way we want to, right? Those emotions are there. And so sometimes we're just going to let it go and let it pass. So sometimes, those are the right reactions. Other times we can call it out. And there are opportunities sometimes to just ask a question or say something sort of on the fly that makes that person reflect. So, they might ask something inappropriate or that you find inappropriate. And it could be something as simple as asking that person, well, why did you ask me that question? Or, why didn't you ask it to this person who maybe is not in a marginalized group? And it sort of makes them realize, oh, right, I'm probably focusing on an area I shouldn't be. So sometimes just flipping the question, or, why do you find why do you need to know that? Or what would make you say that? So, when people say things like that, no, for example, if someone was saying to you, wow, you're so articulate, and, I'd say, well, that's interesting. Why would you say that about me? And, kind
Yeah.
of getting them to sort of reflect a little bit of what their thought process was, that can sometimes be a good way. Humor is also a good way. If you have a good relationship with somebody, you can always kind of make it a bit of a joke. You can kind of throw back another similar question to them. Sometimes that can work as well to sort of diffuse the situation. Again, if it's something very light, you can call it out at the moment. But many times what you're going to do is you might want to call it in, as we say. So call it in is really after the fact, taking someone aside and talking to them about what's been said. And if you're going to do that, again, you're probably going to be doing it with people that you care about. So again, if you value the relationship, it's worth it then to use this as a teaching opportunity, because that person will probably be receptive to that. And I'd say one of the things you can do is when you're having that conversation, the first thing is you want to sort of disarm the situation. You might be upset. You might be, thinking all kinds of things. At the same time, you don't want to necessarily assume that person's intent. So it's easy to say, oh, well, what you said was really racist or that was sexist, or you're assuming intent then, right? You think that person might have had a negative intent. So it's usually good not to assume the intent and just stick with the facts. Yesterday, when you said that, it made me feel this. So you're really focusing on the impact. And you might even be gentle about it. You might say, I'm sure you didn't mean it this way, but when you said that, it made me feel this. So you're really focusing on how something made you feel, so that people can't sit around, turn around and then say, criticize how you're feeling. They might try. They might say, oh, well, you shouldn't feel this way, but we can't control the emotions that get triggered in different situations. And if you find that person is still a bit defensive and saying, well, I didn't mean it that way, etc., this is an opportunity to say, I thank you for clarifying your intent. I'd like to clarify the impact on me. And so you're really just keep on focusing on the intent, and then just giving them other opportunities and saying, next time maybe you could say this, or next time if you have that type of question, ask this, or really sort of digging down into that discomfort. But sort of by taking away that defensiveness, I think helps then to address the situation. And it's worth it to do it with the right person. I think with the right people, you can build a better relationship. And the reality is we all make mistakes, and we all will commit, microaggressions. I've committed microaggressions. I'm sure you have too. And we don't even know it, right? We've probably said something to somebody and, they're rolling their eyes and saying, oh my gosh, because we can't know everyone else's lived experiences. The microaggressions happen in all domains, in all types of different facets of life. And so we all do them, right? So we have to sort of understand when we're on the receiving end of it, that this person has probably never been told, has a different lived experience, so doesn't necessarily quote unquote get it. But why would they, right? There's things I don't get because I don't have someone else's lived experience. So it's really kind of having that conversation, I think, are the best ways that we can address microaggressions.
Yeah, no, I really love the way you put it, Seema, talking about the difference between intent and impact. Because
Mhm.
you have had situations where, like, I realize that the defensive barriers go up so high.
Yes.
Like, I
Yeah.
get that, but can we
Yeah.
deal with it? And it just gets stuck. I love you say it almost like, first of all, be selective of who the person is with. They can, think about relationship, try out the humor, but also you kind of say like, let's put different, like, the intent is clear, like it just, but let's not focus on impact. I think it's an amazing way of kind of getting past that barrier I think people get stuck on.
Yeah, and everyone gets defensive, like we all do, right? When someone's telling us something, and there's a lot of sort of, I guess, in this DI space, there's a lot of different thoughts about that. Like there are some people that, they're tired of being sort of putting these white gloves on and being delicate, and they'll say it's not my job to make that person feel comfortable, and they might take a very direct approach, and that's one way of doing it. And sometimes, while it's frustrating to sort of be gentle about something, at the end of the day, I want that person's behavior to change. And if they're defensive, they're not going to be listening. And so it's really about sort of trying to get away from the defensiveness so that you're communicating, the person understands what your point is. So when they are less defensive, they're going to be more open than to changing. And yeah, it does put a lot more onus on the person of a marginalized group. And sometimes there's a bit of a pushback, why do I always have to be the one to? But at the end of the day, I personally feel if you want to see change, it's
Yeah.
really about finding ways to communicate that the other person understands. And when they do understand, then it seems to go off a lot better. And even admitting that we all commit these things, we give examples. I have examples of times where I've misgendered somebody or assumed something about someone and said something and then afterwards realized, oof, I really messed that one up. Like we all will do that. So having that conversation with others will hopefully let them feel a little bit less defensive.
Thank you for that, Seema. Maybe in a connected topic, I think the idea is that, so this is about having that one-to-one, but maybe situations where minorities can benefit from having allies or sponsors. Any advice you can talk about when it comes to the roles of allies and sponsors,
Mm.
maybe how to best select them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, we all need allies. And, when we're talking about these microaggressions, we were talking about how we can respond to them if we're on the receiving end. But ideally, we have allies that are also advocating for us, and that are sort of intervening at the right moments because it is very draining, right? It's draining to always have to advocate for yourself and, get a seat at the table and be heard. And so when we have people around us that recognize, the disadvantaged position we might be in certain situations and can advocate and help us, it really makes a big difference. And I think this is where, we see change. We see change when we have people who are at the center of privilege and power working together with people that are in marginalized groups. That's where the change happens because by myself, whether it's as a woman or as a visible minority, there are certain things I can yell about and push for change, and it won't happen unless my allies are there. So allies are really important. And just to say, an ally, what it is an ally is somebody who's not part of a marginalized group but who is willing to advocate on behalf of that group and support that group, but under their direction. So the under your direction part is really important because we don't want to overstep our boundaries as allies either, right? I wouldn't necessarily want someone advocating for me without having checked in with me and seen what I need and what I want. So allies are really people who are connected to us, that understand what we're going through, are checking in, but also willing to sort of walk alongside us in that struggle, whatever that struggle is. And so, especially if we're talking about our careers, we need allies. We need to have people that are willing to represent us or advocate for us because when we advocate for ourselves, it's easy to say, oh, well, she thinks that because, she has a chip on her shoulder. Well, of course, she's going to think that because she's a woman or a minority. But having somebody else who doesn't have sort of those different characteristics advocating for us, their voice is going to be heard louder. And that's just how it works, right? Whether we like it or not, some voices do have more effective power. They're listened to more often. So it really is important to start looking for allies. And it's interesting because a lot of times we talk about how to be a good ally, but we don't talk much about how do we find allies ourselves when we're needing them. And it's a bit trickier, I think. There's not really a perfect way to go about it. We'd like to hope that people are willing to advocate for us, but I think one of the things we have to do is we always have to be building those relationships. You're not going to find allies if you're somebody who kind of sticks to themselves, doesn't network, doesn't connect with others. So the first step in anything is really starting to build relationships with your coworkers, with people around you, getting to know them, because that's sort of the first kind of pre-screen I think you can start doing, is learning about the people around you. And then from that group, pay attention, start to pay attention to who advocates or maybe said something in a meeting that, oh, okay, that person seems to get it, or, oh, that person seems to have an interesting point of view and is willing to sort of stand up, right? Doesn't seem defensive, acknowledges their privilege. You might see different situations. I was in a meeting at some point in a training, and I was giving examples of microaggressions that women might face, being cut off or being interrupted. And a lot of research shows that happens more often to women. And this young man put his hand up and he said, yeah, I've seen that a lot in my workplace and it used to bother me. And he started talking about it. And it was great to have his perspective as a white man and supporting, right away I could see, okay, this person could be an ally. So you start to pay attention to who those people are. And then it's really about deepening your relationship with those types of people, because you want to really build that relationship. So it's really about deepening those relationships and then having that exchange, because they often want to learn from you and you want to learn from them.
Yeah. I think, Sema, just hearing it, where I think about the power of relationships, the power of networks. And in this case as well, as there are people out there who do mean well, and they're out there just identifying who they are and just strengthening that relationship with them.
Exactly.
So, Sema, so before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to maybe to highlight or mention again?
Yeah, I think that I think one of the things I want to highlight is really just the self-preservation as we are going through microinequities. We can't negate how important the impact is on us. Sometimes we're in a situation where we deal with the odd microinequity here and there, or microaggression, and we don't realize the impact that it really does have on us and our mental health as well. And sometimes it's only when we leave a situation we realize, oh, that was tough, dealing with the constant barrage of questions or feeling othered, not feeling like we belong. And I think there's a value to really seeking out those workplaces where we do belong, where we do feel where we belong, because you'll see your productivity is better. You can accomplish so much more. There's that sense of inclusion that then drives us to just be the best we can be. And so we tend to think that microaggressions, and probably because you got the word micro in there, people think micro means like it's not important. The micro part is because it's a small singular incident that might seem small, but when you again accumulate them all together, they are really heavy. It's like wearing a big backpack, like imagine you're climbing up this mountain and some people can just go freely, and some people are carrying this backpack that just keeps getting heavier and heavier and heavier. And so the impact of microaggressions are big ones, and that's why it's good to address them. But I would say that also, if you're in an environment where it's a constant barrage of microaggressions and micro inequities, then it's time to start thinking about, okay, is this really the right place for me? Because it does, a lot of studies have shown and research has shown that the accumulation of these microaggressions does create situations of discrimination and does have a strong impact on people and their mental health and their productivity. So, they're sort of subtle, light things, but they shouldn't be taken lightly, is what I would say. You have to sort of advocate for that and really be conscious of that. And again, the more you surround yourself with allies, the more then you can hopefully fight those together, and you have your allies really doing it with you. Because if you're isolated and alone, it becomes even more difficult to manage those microaggressions.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Sema. I think that what I heard is the idea where, I think the word micro might also be kind of like, it's such a dangerous word because it's so easy to minimize it.
Yeah, you think it's like nothing, but it is something.
Yeah. So Seema, in terms of if anyone wants to contact you, follow you, get in touch with you, what's the best way they could do that?
Yeah. So if anyone's interested in kind of learning more, and if you feel like you're in a workplace where they could kind of use a lot of this information, you can always go to my website. It's burneyconsulting.ca, all in one word, and the contact information is there. And I do a lot of training really on the corporate side of teaching people who are in power and privilege to recognize when microaggressions are occurring. And there's a lot of about, how can they advocate? What is the right way to step in? How can they be allies and check in with marginalized groups? So a lot of the work I'm doing is really on that side of it, because that's a really important piece. Yes, we have to advocate for ourselves, and we have to make sure that we're doing and taking the steps we can, but there's a lot of work that others can do also to support us and to be allies. And so that, again, it takes both sides, right, to really move the needle. So yeah, always happy to or connect with me on LinkedIn. Always happy to keep expanding my own network in this space.
Thank you for being a guest today, Seema.
Thank you.